All right, everyone, welcome to the Asparagus class. This is our speakers panel. My name is Jenny Carlio. I'm the project director and the agent in Cape May, and welcome to Somerset County as well. So we have here Sherry Wade. She is a chef. You saw her in the video. Originally, she was a restaurant owner in Philadelphia. Now she grows in Cape May. And also this is Tom Shepard, our farmer featured in the video of Shepard Farms. And we have here Dr. Stephen Garrison. Steve worked at Rutgers for over 30 years in asparagus breeding. So please welcome the panel, and we're going to start asking questions now. Okay. So does anyone have a favorite variety?
Well, I think the important thing is to select an adapted all-male hybrid variety. We've done testing in many years here in New Jersey, and we've identified and bred the varieties here, and so they're all well adapted. Some of them have different characteristics as far as size, earliness, color, tip tightness, but they're all suitable. I think the ones that are mentioned in maybe in the handout, Jersey Giant, Jersey Knight are the standards, Jersey Deluxe, and there's a number of new hybrids just coming on the market right now that are probably superior to those older varieties.
Oh, yeah, I want to start with saying we owe a debt of gratitude to Steve for the varieties we have. Rutgers has done a wonderful job. It was in the 60s that we had a disease that wiped out the crop. At one time, New Jersey had 30,000 acres of asparagus. Now there's, I think, 1,600 acres of asparagus in New Jersey. And that's all because of Rutgers gave us those varieties, and they're used all over the world. But yeah, some of the original varieties that they came up with, the all males, the Supreme, the Deluxe and all that are very good. Some of the new ones they have are just coming out with names. The Sequoia is really good. We're trying that. And our yields are higher. And the tip, like Steve said, it's a really important tip. You mentioned in your talk about not having it expanding. Yeah. That's a dead thing. If you start having open head tips, your customers won't want it. So if you have a good tight tip, that's what you want. You need a variety that stays that way for as long as possible. And some of these new varieties are good at that.
Thank you. Is there a difference between varieties in the harvest window? So do different varieties come into harvest at different times?
There's a slight difference. For example, Jersey Knight is later season. Jersey Supreme, I would say, is one of our earlier ones. There might be a difference of only about 7 days. Would you say, Tom?
7 days to 2 weeks. Sometimes the Supreme will be earlier. Yeah. And a lot of times that's the higher market window for us selling wholesale. If we can get asparagus by Easter, it's great. By Mother's Day is really good. And then after Mother's Day, the market goes down some. So yeah, if you can get earlier stuff, but the Supreme at the tail end starts to flower, and we have to stop on it.
Okay, good. How about the average cost per acre to plant?
Well, that's going to depend on your if you're using crowns or transplants. I think we mentioned in the film that you can get seed for 4 or 5 cents a seed and probably produce your transplant for 10 cents, whereas that crown is going to cost you 14. But you've got that crown has actually got at least a year more on development because it was seeded in the field to be your crown a year ahead of time. So you're going to gain that year. And with the transplants, we've had problems with weed control the last few years. We did 10 years worth of transplants, and then we switched back to crowns because weed control is a problem. And if you have to send a crew out to weed, you can spend $200 or $300 an acre on weeding. So that would just blows out all your cost savings you had by transplanting instead of crowns.
I think for new growers especially, crowns is the way to go.
And we think the drip really helps a lot, extending your season and getting you better yields as well. So all these things add to the cost of it, and so it's tough to put a real value on or cost on planting it.
I think some of the research we've done indicated that crowns are about half a year better than seedlings, not a full year, but because they take a little longer to get established. In some cases, it's a little slower.
Okay, we have a question about herbicide and weed control. Steve, would you like to talk about the production guide?
Sure. We have a production guide that's available through Rutgers Cooperative Extension, and it's now, it used to be just in New Jersey, but the whole middle Atlantic area is using this guide, and just contact your county agent, or you can pick it up at the vegetable growers meeting in Atlantic City. Has all the recommendations for asparagus we've talking about the details, all the chemicals and seeding and times and depths and so forth. So it's a really valuable piece of information. And
you talk about weed control. In the video, you might have noticed, and a grower would have noticed, there were some blocks with green in them, some perennial weeds that we can't kill during the season. So they kind of got out of control there. So we come, as soon as we get finished harvesting, we'll go with some really good strong weed killers to kill all that. But sometimes in an old field, it's tough to keep the perennials out.
And can zoysia grass be planted to control weeds between the rows?
I don't know.
We've never tried
living
that.
Mulch?
Living mulch. I would say you certainly wouldn't want to start with it from the beginning of the planting.
Too much competition?
Too much competition early. That would be a research project.
Get back to us how successful it was.
How about how many workers per day are needed to harvest and pack 1 acre of product?
We're harvesting over 300 acres, and we've got 140 men in the field doing that. Plus, I've got 100 people in the packing house. So there's 240 people harvesting, 340, 350 acres of asparagus. And those guys in the film, I want to stress that that's not sped up. That's how fast those people are moving. And the ladies in the packing house, they have a rhythm. They're moving, and they're getting paid real well for it. But on a smaller scale, without those skilled people, it might even take more per acre. So, a person to the acre, I think, would be at least.
And from Somerset County, they would like to know, do you have a challenge getting good workers to help?
Yes, we use H2A for a lot of our people, because then we can get people in, and we know we have them for the season. The INS is not going to come in and chase them off. But we've been fortunate up to now. We really hope our government does something with immigration. We've been asking that for a long time, and they really haven't come through for us. But it's not something that locals are going to do. They'll work in the packing house, but not in the field. Our packing house labor is probably 50% locals, but the other 50% is the wives and of the guys in the field. So yeah, it can be a challenge, but you need good people, because it has to be harvested right, or you lose a lot of yield.
How about the minimal acreage to make a profit?
That all depends on what your outlet is. If you have a roadside stand, or you're doing a restaurant,
small restaurants,
if you have an acre and you harvest 150 a year over a 2-month period, that's a lot more than a restaurant will use. Even a big one, I would say, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
How much would a big restaurant use?
A big one? Jeez. When we ran a smaller restaurant, and to go through a 22-pound case would probably be about a week and a half.
Okay, so
You
that
know,
tells
so
you.
a big
So with an
restaurant,
acre, you could supply that easily.
Yeah.
And what does 250 boxes per acre equate to money-wise? Like, so 4,000 pounds equals how much money?
Well, over the last 3 or 4 years, we've averaged wholesale around $50 a box. So that's 28 pounds. We do 28. We equate everything to 28 pounds. That's the normal box. So you can just go do the math from there.
Okay, thank you. How about, is there any automated equipment available for harvesting and cultivation?
there's some work done in Europe. A lot of any new things comes from Europe because their cost of labor is so high that they can afford to do things differently before we can, because our labor is relatively cheap compared to them. We stay with manual longer than they do, but there are some things they're using for it, but I'm not too sure it would work in our situation because we have sandy soil, but we also have stones.
Yeah.
And any knife that's used on a machine that hits one of those stones is going to break, and you're going to have to replace it. So it hasn't worked for some other machines in other industries because of our soil. But again, as the cost of things goes up, maybe we're going to have to change our methods. And maybe if we have a customer like a restaurant that doesn't care whether it's 9 inches long or not, you just want asparagus, so we could cut it mechanically and sell a restaurant the smaller stuff because you're going to cut it up anyhow. I mean, I'm just saying other customers, and maybe we're going to have to adapt that way, but hopefully it's not before I retire.
And we have a question from Somerset County about pricing. So we already talked about wholesale price, but Sherry, how much do restaurant owners usually want to pay for asparagus or offer to pay?
Well, and that kind of falls into too, I feel like with the organic, when we've talked about, you can, if you're going to a restaurant, a lot of restaurants today are trying to focus more on organic, sustainable a lot of times, so you can get more money. But I came from Philadelphia, so the cost of things were a little bit higher than I think what you pay at a roadside stand down here. So there's that difference too. But if you're at a nice high-end restaurant, I mean, they'd spend $3 a bunch, $2.50 a bunch if you're buying from a small farm, you know.
Yeah, the $50 is a little less than $2 a bunch wholesale.
Yeah.
So yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. How about, I know Steve mentioned this in the video, but we have this question from here, feasibility of growing organically.
It's feasible. Some have done it, but some good growers have given up on it also because of the cost of weed control, especially, I think. Is that Tom? Is
Yeah, well, my brother David used to be with us at Shepherd Farms, and he split off and is doing just organic now, and he started to try to do some when he's with us, and when he left, we made it conventional. And he's just now going to start harvesting organic asparagus this year, but it's been a struggle with weeds. It's tough.
Yeah. So you have not only have the weeds during the season, but you've got the perennial weeds and winter annuals from the fall through the winter, and so you've got to control those before you even start the cutting season, and then they grow during the cutting season, and you have to get in there with the mechanical equipment and till that, and it's never 100% with any kind of weed control.
They do it in other areas, other parts of the world, so it can be done.
It can be done.
I think too sometimes it might be easier if you're smaller,
Yeah.
because it's easier to keep up on it randomly versus the larger you are, that labor that you'd have to spend the money on to keep up on it makes it difficult.
And let me add that if you are going to go organic, it's really important to have a good site selection because you want good air drainage so to minimize foliage diseases, and of course the insects are always present, but good air drainage will help reduce the foliage diseases.
Also from Somerset, what do you do with the little seedlings that start at the base of the crown?
I don't know.
So that's your next year's crop. I mean, you don't split the crop. You plant it originally and then just keep going. And like I said, when you first plant it, it's a single row, and every year it gets wider and wider and wider. And that's part of the problem with weed control is you've got a bed maybe 18 inches wide of all asparagus, and the weeds grow all amongst it. So that's part of the problem.
I'm wondering if this question is related to the seedling weeds that come up in the asparagus.
The weed.
Yeah,
okay.
seedlings, asparagus seedlings being weeds in the asparagus maybe.
Well, some of those old varieties
Yeah,
that kind of got a throwback. They had some seed that seeded. That could be a problem. But that's where you need a really good all male hybrid,
Right.
so you don't have that.
Right.
So at the end of the season, do you leave 2 inches of stem or do you cut it down to the base? Maybe Steve could answer that.
We, at the end of this, well, at this time of year, from this time of year on to February, we probably cut it down right to the soil level.
Yeah, at the end of the season, your last cutting, you go out and you do all the weed killing and all that and fertilizing. But now, like Steve said, we'll go out and start mowing. You just get it as close to the ground, as we can. We'll sometimes use a flail mower and go over it twice to get it just as close to the ground as we can.
Is it bad for the crop if you leave a little bit? If
Just a
it's
place for
higher,
disease.
it's just for disease reasons?
Okay. When do you know it is time to move your asparagus planting?
I guess that probably means when do you know it's time to finish, terminate your yield, your harvesting, and to plant another crop. And I think you probably should keep a record of your yields, and if they really are starting to go down and size is down, the tips are poorer quality, especially toward the end of the season, then you need to plan ahead several years so you can be ready to plant and be ready to harvest, so that you don't have a discontinuity in your production system. So you have to plan that ahead into it.
Yeah, just like Steve says, we keep track of every section every year, and as it starts to go down, here's the old asparagus we took out last year was Jersey Night, and had gone from 121 down to 90 to the acre, and so it was time to come out. It was, and we needed that ground for other things. And the great thing about following asparagus is the next crop or next 2 crops are wonderful because of all the roots that are there, all the organic material, and we had a field of peppers after the 20 years of asparagus that was just our best field by far this year.
Wow.
So yeah, it's but you can never go back to asparagus. Isn't that pretty accurate?
That's right. It's best to plant if you're starting out fresh. Most likely you have not had asparagus in that area before, but we say the longer you can plant between crops, the better. Minimum is 10 years. I'd like to see 15 or 20, right, Tom?
Yeah, we didn't start till '97, so we don't have the history of it. So
yeah.
Okay, thanks. If we could have everybody on the panel, including myself, speak a little bit louder, that would help people in the audience here. The mics are working in Somerset, but are the male rhizomes, when harvested, less tender than female?
No, there's no difference between male and female shoots as far as quality is concerned.
Okay,
the female shoots, on the average, have larger diameter, but as far as quality, there's no real difference.
I learned that. I didn't realize there was a difference, that there was male and female. I had no clue.
Well,
can you intercrop with asparagus and a low-growing crop after the asparagus are no longer being harvested? So not like a living cover crop, but an actual crop, intercropping.
I think today with all the restrictions on different pesticides and what's labeled for one crop and another crop, I would not recommend it.
Maybe all 3 of you can talk to this one. How intensive is the labor in harvesting?
You walk across the field, bend it over for 10 hours a day, see how intense that is. I'm not going to do it. I got too much to bend over. But I did it one time in my life.
It's, you have to be in good shape. And first couple of weeks, because I do a lot of cutting on the research plots here over the years, and first couple of weeks are a little bit tough, but then I'm getting in shape and I can handle it. But if you're doing it commercially and expecting to move through the field like you saw in the video, you really have to be in shape.
We're not going to get hired.
I could do it for half hour probably.
Do you remove the female crowns?
No, we do not. There's not an easy way to there's no good way to determine whether a crown is going to be male or female when you plant it. They all look the same until you can see the flowers, essentially. So we can't, there's no good way of separating male and female crowns when you're at planting time.
Unless you see berries in the field at one point, and then maybe you could.
Well, then if you see berries in the field on an established plant, then if you want to dig it out, you can, but then you lose the production from that area. So we don't recommend that because you damage the roots of the adjacent plants also.
Right. Tom, you have given us some really interesting information in all the folders. Do you want to talk about, maybe you can hold it up and show the camera and the audience which ones you're talking about?
Well, okay.
Go through them.
Let me go to the one, my rough sketch of how you plant it. And anybody that's planting it would be similar to that if I can find it in this pile of stuff here. Yeah, just real rough sketch is when we start in the spring, we're going to start our crowns. We go down 6 inches and throw up a bed, and then put the drip underneath that, and then the crown in it. And as the season progresses, we start cultivating into the, covering up the crown. And that's another way of weed control is by throwing dirt to it as it comes up. By the end of the season, you want it to be perfectly flat, because if there's a hole there, and Steve can attest to this, that if water sits on top of it, the asparagus does not like that. It likes well-drained soil, so if you've got heavy soil, you just want to make sure water is going to roll off of it. So by the end of the year, you've got a flat bed that's probably 4 inches above the flat, but the crown itself is down in under the ground at least 6 inches. And then in the next year, you start throwing up the top of that bed, so you're at least 10 inches under the ground. So you're making a nice flat surface on top. Now, not everybody does it this way. Some people have rounded beds. We have a flat bed because we want a nice flat area for all those shoots to come up. That's what we've done. And the drip for us has really worked well. I talked about that affecting the yields really positively. There's been some questions about the varieties, and I put one in there that talks about the different varieties we've grown over the years and what the yields in the last 4 or 5 years are on them. And you'll see some of the ones that Steve talked about were the original Knight and Giant and Supreme, or some of the original Rutgers varieties, right? And some of the new ones, you got one down here, this 982, if you look at it, it yields as high as 300 to the acre. And that's one that Steve came up with a numbered variety up until last year. Now, no, they never did name that.
No, they
one.
did not name it.
Ironically, Rutgers produced it. Works well in New Jersey, but what I understand is it doesn't work well in other states, so the seed producers decided not to carry that one on.
So that is more of a niche type of variety, apparently.
It's beautiful for us.
Yeah.
And then there's some other varieties down here that have now been named by some of the seed companies. The Sequoia is a good one. That was 1118, 1113. So yeah, Steve has given us some varieties here, some numbered varieties over the years to try. But the problem is that we like them, and then the seed companies don't expand on them. So there are all kinds of information here about what kind of yields you can get. So deal with it as you see fit. Now the new varieties, you guys say have a much better head control, right?
The newer varieties that we've released, much better tip tightness than the old ones. The old varieties were sort of developed for dual purpose, both processing and fresh market. And for processing, you didn't have to have quite as tight a tip to get a marketable spear. But now we're moved on into entirely fresh market, so we need a good tight tip, and these newer varieties do that.
Now, so there was a question about different varieties and different earliness, and I included a chart of this year, every 2 weeks, what a variety was harvested. And you'll see some varieties, Supreme especially, is early, not so much late that you have to stop on it because it loses its quality, but it's a variety that will give you early if that's what you're looking for. And historically, that's when the best market prices are. And when we do ads for our chain stores, we will give them a higher price before Mother's Day, say $54, and $50 after, because the market will come down. We want to keep them in the business. So there's all kinds of ways of determining what your market is. Today I looked online to the Department of Agriculture, and I saw that asparagus, we're the 4th biggest producer of asparagus in the country. 5.6 million pounds for New Jersey, valued $9.6 million on 1,400 acres of asparagus. So I thought that was a pretty interesting statistic. Not a very big state, but we're pretty good with asparagus.
Are there any ethnic varieties of asparagus to consider growing similar to our discussions with peppers or basil, and any special packaging at roadside stands?
Well, I'll comment on the varieties. There are no really ethnic varieties. There are the types that were you mentioned
about
before.
The different colors,
the different
like
colors.
The purple, white.
The purple was more a traditional European, especially Italian variety, and we've introduced it here, and we have several hybrids that are not commercially available, but we've developed them, and they have quite different characteristics. The spears are larger, they're more tender, they're sweeter, and so you could consider that a type. And then of course the white is really just green asparagus that's grown underground, and so it doesn't develop chlorophyll, and therefore it has a white color. So that's mainly a European.
German, isn't it?
German,
big time in Germany.
Yeah. It's a really entirely different vegetable than green asparagus. It doesn't taste like asparagus at all when
and
you
the purple, like you're saying, the sweetness, I feel like that you can almost eat raw.
Yeah, it's
you don't even really
it's
need
like
to
good
cook
for
it.
dipping, the purple, and it's really good.
Yeah.
Now I heard a story that out here at the research farm that when you first had some purple, nobody would eat it, and after a while, whenever you got done harvesting, they all took it home.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted that.
As we were developing these varieties and testing them, we graded them and then made some of them available to the workers. And at first, that was different. They didn't turn up their nose, but then a few started to try it, and then, as Tom said, now it's the first thing to go usually, and so it's a better quality product.
If
really.
it's more tender, does it hold up through the process? I mean, marketing and.
It's got enough rigidity, so it does. It is larger. It's average spear size is larger, but it's not not
fibrous. I feel like sometimes the larger green asparagus will get a little more fibrous.
Okay.
And I feel like the purple will still stay more tender. Like with the white asparagus that never gets the chlorophyll, like that usually the outside you have to peel all the time, or it's like really stringy.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a misconception over the years that some people think that a larger spear is older and therefore more tough and so forth. Spear size is not related to age. Spear diameter is related to the diameter of the bud that comes up from the crown. And so there's a misconception. A lot of uninformed sort of chefs have said, well, I've read where it says the bigger spears are older, and it's not true at all. The diameter is determined by the bud size and the crown.
But there's a lot of people that like you said, the spaghetti ones, they like these. Oh, that's the best. That's all right. We have that. We'll sell that to you.
Yeah.
And then the big ones, you some of these big steak restaurants, that you get 3 pieces of
Three
asparagus this
giant
big
ones.
for $10.
Or if you and I don't know, is there any truth to when when you're starting a new planting area, sometimes they'll come up different sizes. Is that just because of the spacing and they're not filled in yet, or does that change?
They'll come up at different sizes, different crowns may be more vigorous than others and get a better start. And so they're not exactly uniform like a cookie cutter. That's why we have to grade them into the different size categories. But each variety sort of has its average size and its distribution of sizes. And it's slightly different for each variety. Some are average smaller spears, and some average large spears.
Do you burn plants after they die off and then cut what's left?
Burn plants? Back 40 years ago, open burning was allowed, but New Jersey does not allow open burning, so you can't burn the brush off at the end of the season anymore. You have to, after it dries and it's completely senescent, you can mow it off at the ground level as we discussed.
You can get a special permit though to burn the brush.
Yeah, they.
Well, you can. Like you said, you can get a permit from the state, and you have to notify your local fire company whenever you're ready to go. Make sure the wind's not blowing in the wrong direction. And it's not easy.
No.
And when it's time to go, it's time to go. So in Florida, they burn sugarcane all over. So, but that's not New Jersey. We're a little tougher up here.
Okay, so that's all the time we have for the speakers panel. We'd like to thank you guys for coming out tonight and sharing all your wealth of knowledge with us. So please give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
So SWOT analysis stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What do strengths and weaknesses have in common with each other? Okay, they are internal to your business. So these are things that are under your control or are about you. Let's see. How about opportunities and threats? What do those two things have in common? They're external to your business. So these are things you absolutely cannot control, and they are outside of your business. What do strengths and opportunities have in common with each other? Ooh, good. Positives, right? How about weaknesses and threats? They're negatives, right? So you can see, if you analyze any subject or any topic or any idea, using this, you really get a good picture of, what maybe you want to do with what you can do with what's practical. And the idea is to do this analysis so you can make what you want to do a practical and real thing that you can actually accomplish. So if you did your homework, let's talk about strengths first. What are some strengths that you might have in your business for growing asparagus? What was that? Finance. If you have money, that is definitely a strength, right, Tom?
Yep. You start out with money, it's always a positive.
Yep, that's something that is a big problem for beginning farmers in America. It's land, capital, and labor. Those are the three limitations that beginning farmers typically have. What else could be a strength in your business for starting asparagus?
You said land, that's a big thing.
Land, yep.
As Steve said, it's the right kind of land.
Like arable, right?
Well,
Yep. Anything else we can think of? Equipment. And what, Tracy? Customers, okay. Now, equipment is a very interesting one because I was telling someone earlier, sometimes farmers don't always know what they have to offer, but they might have a whole barn of equipment available to use that, maybe it's specialized or maybe it's something that nobody else has. in the region, so it wouldn't be easy to buy. So equipment is actually a really big one. And customers, obviously, you know, you can grow everything all you want, but if you can't sell it, you don't have anybody to sell it to, then you're out of luck. So that's definitely good strengths, especially if this has to do with relationships that you have with specific people, because customer relationships are a real relationship, even though they are a business relationship. And hopefully in all of our videos, we talk about cultivating that relationship with the customers. How about weaknesses? You don't have to talk about your own business, but can you give me some examples of weaknesses for growing asparagus? Labor, huge. This is a very big problem for us right now. And so Tom says he uses different programs for securing labor legally. But you know, we know that in asparagus this is really backbreaking work, so we've got to find a way to do it. Definitely we have to consider, you know, do we have enough labor to harvest this crop? Because planting is a lot easier than harvesting, right, Tom? Yep. What other weaknesses might we have? Regulation. Okay. Is that internal to your business?
Oh, that's an external one.
Okay, so let's go over to threats, just to put that on here, because it's true. Okay, so back to weaknesses. Internal to your business, weaknesses that might be here. Have any of you ever grown asparagus before? No. No? Knowledge of the crop? But you get the idea, right? To examine the things that maybe you don't have that you might need to work on. How about opportunities, things that are outside your business that you could capitalize on? What was that?
Demand.
Demand, okay. So demand of a product that you have access to, okay. Anyone have any relationships with someone that might be setting up a restaurant in their town, or do you have a roadside market already in existence on your farm?
I fix computers for a lot of restaurants.
Oh.
So, they're going to look at me a bit strange saying, why would you want to grow stuff if you can fix computers? But that's where I'm headed, because there are no old guys in my industry. We are retired.
Okay.
So I'm looking at the end of my life cycle.
Okay. So we have someone in the audience who fixes computers and is looking into farming, but he knows a lot of people opening restaurants, or who you fix their computers.
Yeah,
you fix the computers at restaurants. So we want to take a look at opportunities that you might have around that you can, you know, kind of brainstorm with some ideas, like what exists in your area, in your world, that maybe you can capitalize on that you haven't done yet. So you could potentially do that. So threats. Let's name some threats. Huge one that we missed so far. Diseases. Right. Diseases. Pests, right? Totally out of our control. There's one we're missing. And, okay, so climate change. And Tom knows all about that because he's right on the bay. I heard another one. Food safety. Yep. So that's in regulations, but that's worthy of its own mention. Okay, so after you've identified all these kinds of things for your business, and this worksheet, you guys have this worksheet, right? You can go through this and do it for yourself. What you need to do is you need to put it all together. You need to figure out how to capitalize on your strengths. So each farm has its own set of strengths and opportunities that are available to it, that are special to you, that are unique to you. So you want to capitalize on them, you want to build on them. Weaknesses, you can do something about the weaknesses. You can, if you don't have knowledge, you can take a class. You're taking a class right now. You can buy the vegetable guide and read it. Labor, you know, you can work on these kinds of things. education, you can remedy all of these. So in the weakness category, the idea is identify it and write it down, because when you do that, then you can start to work on it and you can turn it into something that's not so terrible. Threats, on the other hand, very hard to manage because you can't control any of these things, right? So what we have is something called risk management. Can anyone name for me the 5 areas of risk? Okay. Financial, legal, human personal, market, and production. So for these, any kind of risks that you have, even in agriculture, is going to fit under one of these categories. So there's different programs or different things that you can do to take action, minimizing the risks that are in here, right? There's 4 different ways we can minimize risk or manage risk. Does anyone know what those are? No? Okay. So we have avoid. How can you avoid risk of growing asparagus? Don't grow asparagus. Don't forget that that's always an option. You don't have to grow it. You don't have to be in business. You don't have to leave your computer fixing business to start a farm. Just keep that in mind. You always have an out if you want it. If you think it'll be a better business decision not to go into business, you can do that. What else can you do to manage your risk?
Insure against
Good. Insure. We call that transfer. Because basically, all right, example, insurance. Basically, you're not removing the risk from happening. You're just you're transferring the risk on your farm to somebody else who's willing to cover that if you pay them contractually, right? So we call that transfer. Great example. We have a lot of crop insurance programs available in our country. Another way you can transfer risk is by buying seedlings. Because instead of planting the seeds, say we're not growing hybrids, right? So say you're planting the seeds, you're incurring all of that risk for germination rate, storms, things like that for that very vulnerable period of time that the plant is growing. You can transfer that risk to somebody else, let them grow the product for you. And in the case of asparagus, that works pretty well because they're hybrids, which you can't grow yourself. That's a very specific genetic material. And secondly, it's economically worth it, right, as we heard today. What else can you do to manage risk? How about reducing it? How can you reduce risk in growing asparagus? Good. Planting small. I like this one. To be honest with you guys, I don't recommend anyone plant more than 1/8 of an acre of asparagus for their first planting. Until you know how to grow the crop, you know how hard it is to harvest. First, grow it a little bit, then you can get bigger. What else can you do to reduce risk? Good. Great answer. So plant the right plant for the right place, right? Plant improved varieties. What's the 4th thing you can do? You can accept the risk. So an example of this would be that you realize that, say you have a problem or a loss of some kind, that your business can withstand that loss. So you don't need to insure. you're going to take the risk. You don't need to transfer it. You don't need to avoid it. You're willing to accept that risk, and you're willing to grow that crop anyway. So that's another option that you have.
Where would diversified come into the whole scheme of things, where you're not going to be just an asparagus grower, you're going to have 20 different crops?
So where would diversification come in? That is under reducing, because you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, right? So you're just reducing. That's a good one too. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about SWOT analysis? Do you have any questions from Somerset? I forgot to take input from them during the process. Okay. Let's just wait for them for 1 minute to find out if they have any questions.
We added to diversify, partner with someone who has experience growing asparagus.
That's reduce. That's a good one. Oh, what did you say? It was reduce? Partnering with someone who has experience growing asparagus. And I like that answer, because not only does it have to do a little bit with the threats, but it also has to do with the weakness. So when you're working on the SWOT, don't be afraid to face the realities of your situation. It's very important that you at least go through them and recognize them for what they are, because then you can really start to take action on them, whether positive or redirecting something. And partnering with someone is a great idea, especially if you're a beginner. Oh, go ahead. Okay.
Why would someone do that?
Partner with someone else?
No, it's in my benefit to go with someone who doesn't, they've already knows how to do it, but why would they give me their time?
Okay.
You get a retiring farmer, loves it. Tell you
Yeah.
his opinions.
Yeah.
Doesn't have anybody coming up behind him. Anybody as his family, they eat that up.
It's so true. Yeah, retiring farmer. So the question was, why would someone want to partner with me if they already know how to do it? And Tom Shepard said, if you have a retiring farmer who doesn't have anyone following him or her, right, Tom? then they'd love to mentor someone. And I actually find that a lot, because there is a little bit of a break between the generations, and a lot of new farmers don't have land. And they don't have experience, and there are a lot of existing farmers right now that would love to mentor someone. Just because they have kids doesn't mean they want to take over the farm after them. So great. Any other, oh sure, a question here.
Are there programs or consortiums where you can figure out, is there a demand for asparagus, and for growing it here, if you were to get into that crop, to increase the acreage?
So the question is, how do you know whether there's demand or not? Okay. Did you guys want to, if you do want to answer that, you have to have the mic.
Well, it all depends on the scale, if
Yeah, just 1 second so we can have the mic there.
that would depend on your scale. If you're going to be real small scale and maybe find a roadside market that doesn't grow their own, that would want what you produce, and you would know how much they do, or as the lady said before, the restaurants. But I guess a restaurant doesn't use a whole lot of volume. It all depends on how much your scale is. There's a lot of roadside stands that come into South Jersey from North Jersey to buy product all through the spring before they have it in their own backyards. So that is an option.
Oh, we have another question from the audience. So Tracy asked, do you package other people's asparagus?
We don't do asparagus. We do other things. We do peppers and cukes and squash for other growers, because we have a dedicated line for that. Our asparagus lines are just for our own, because we do so much that if we do anybody else's, we have to, it's not an easy thing to do.
We sort of reverted back to the panel, which is fine, but we turned the camera around. Any other questions from here? No? How about Somerset? Nope. All right, well, now basically done with the class. Going to talk about evaluations.
Could I interject?
Sure, Tom.
The whole SWOT analysis is not just for asparagus, it's for personal as well. And I have a son that's just getting his MBA, and he introduced me to that. saying, you know, that you can do that for your own personal strengths and weaknesses and opportunities, and on a production level or in your own life. So it's worth looking at. So sometimes you think about it long enough, you come up with some challenges you have on your own.
Yeah, someone actually Jeff recommended that I do that the other day. All right, so thank you everybody for coming. Jen's going to talk about the evaluation procedure.